Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. One of the most talked about issues in Vermont during the winter is, how are the roads? The state of Vermont uses sodium chloride or salt to achieve its goal of safe roads at safe speeds. The state also uses a mix called salt brine to meet its policy goal. But the use of salt and salt brine raises questions about environmental impacts. That's why UVM Extension researchers help bring together winter maintenance personnel from all over the state for a discussion about the use of salt on our winter roads. Here's more from Keith Silva.
Like snow and ice, salt is a part of winter.
So can we reduce salt on Road A as compared to Road B?
At the Lake Champlain De-icing Conference, private contractors, municipal employees, and researchers met to discuss the best management practices to reduce salt used on roadways, sidewalks, and parking lots. Chris Stepanuk of UVM's Sea Grant program helped organize this event.
Most of the time people are using sodium chloride to salt to put on these surfaces, these impervious surfaces. And what happens is that salt can run off the surfaces and enter our waterways. And it also impacts roadside plants, and it can cause the plants to be killed by having too much salt.
Stepanuk is working on a research project investigating how salt impacts Vermont's waterways, specifically Lake Champlain.
I'm focusing mostly on water quality, so thinking about what are the impacts of chloride on water quality, on aquatic life, on drinking water. More than 145,000 people get their drinking water out of Lake Champlain. We know from recent research that Lake Champlain chloride levels are increasing over time. They're still at pretty low levels, but they're increasing over time, which if we don't do something about that, at some point there could be negative impacts on our drinking water and aquatic life.
There are two tributaries leading to Lake Champlain that have been tested and shown increased levels of sodium chloride. Sunnyside Brook in Colchester, and here, the Muddy Brook in Williston. Both of these tributaries are surrounded by impervious surfaces, highways, roadways, and parking lots. The salt that's used up there is to keep things safe. But when that salt runs off and ends up down here, that's a safety concern too.
There is a level where we want to have the safety, but we also want to be able to protect the environment. And so there is some threshold there, and defining what that is where the research needs to go. So what is the impact of putting salt on this parking lot? How much is running off into whatever tributary stream or lake?
This conference is a proactive effort, a way to head off road salt at the pass. One thing everyone here agrees on is that this problem isn't going away. Karina Parnapi is the district manager of the Winooski Conservation District.
What we do now has a long-term impact that's going to impact our kids. So what we apply now, it's not going to dilute out. It's not going to dissipate. It's not going to go away. It's still going to be impacting us years down the road. Even after we've switched products or implemented best management practices, that legacy impact is still going to be there. So that just means it's long-term. It can't be removed from the soils.
One of the topics discussed to reduce road salt is to use brine. It's a mixture of salt and water. When temperatures go below 15 degrees, magnesium chloride, molasses, and a corrosion inhibitor are added to the brine. The application of brine is considered an anti-icing management practice.
Anti-icing is let's not let the ice form at all. So we're going to scrape the surface, we're going to put brine down, we're going to do something before the storm happens. So one way I've seen it explained is if you put down a brine, which would be salt and water mixed, before a storm happens, then once it starts snowing, there's going to be something happening underneath that snow. So it's working against ice formation before things happen. Versus de-icing, okay, well, we've already have ice down, now we need to do something to melt that ice. We put salt on, and hopefully that's going to work through that ice and melt it.
Applying brine to roadways is considered a best management practice, but it's not without controversy. There's a bill proposed in the Vermont legislature to ban the use of brine. The reason is due to the corrosion that the additives to the brine can cause to cars, culverts, and bridges. Parnapi disagrees.
Brine is just wetted material applied directly to the road. You get the same thing when you put road salt down and you drive over. It turns into a brine. The only difference is less sodium chloride is actually in the brine solution, so you're applying less product. and it works at a lower temperature to melt the ice. So it's actually more beneficial. While yes, we do see that it can get into crevices of culverts and into concrete and corrode our bridges, but the same thing happens when we drive over regular road salt. The difference is just it's better for the environment because you're doing a less application.
Parnaby believes the best management practice to reduce road salt is something that contractors and road crews at this conference put to use every winter. Good old-fashioned diligence and determination.
Every product, if you apply them before a storm starts, then you have it down, so you break the bond of the snow to the surface, and then that will automatically mean you're not going to get any ice. And if you maintain plowing, you don't need to apply product. Plow, plow, plow. That is a best management practice that they can do that will make sure that you're not applying salt. So it's only for the really icy conditions that you're going to need it. And if you put it down first, it actually takes less product to melt the ice. If you apply it on top, it takes over 10 times as much to melt down to the roadway.
This conference is directed at municipal employees and private contractors. But Stepanek doesn't want to overlook the role everyone can play to reduce the use of road salt.
As homeowners, you might be shoveling your own sidewalk or your own driveway. The biggest thing that I can say is read the bag. If you're using salt, it's not going to be effective below 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The biggest thing that I want to share is that it's not just our commercial businesses or cities and towns that are needing to be aware, but us as individuals. So ask your contractor if they're using best practices and take that initiative as an individual.
So when the next storm hits, it's best to get ahead of the ice and snow. And that's something that's worth one salt. In Burlington, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
The use of salt on our roads is not the only thing Vermonters think of when the snowflakes begin to fall. From the earliest memories of our childhood, many of us can remember hearing the phrase, "No two snowflakes are alike." It was a scientific discovery made by a man from Jericho more than 130 years ago. Rebecca Gollin has the story.
Vermonters are known for being inventive, and one of the people who helped establish that reputation did a lot of his innovative work right here on Nashville Road in Jericho.
Oh my gosh, who was Wilson? He was a farmer, a dreamer, a self-taught photographer and scientist and weather expert and a musician and so many different people all rolled into one.
Sue Richardson is talking about her great-great-uncle, Wilson Bentley.
My grandmother, Amy Bentley Hunt, was one of Snowflake Bentley's 8 nieces and nephews. She grew up on the farm with him there in Jericho. She was actually his favorite by all accounts. And I grew up on her and my grandfather's farm here in Jericho, hearing the stories about Uncle Willie.
Bentley was fascinated by the natural world, and when he was 15, his mother, who had been a school teacher, gave him a microscope. This opened up a whole new world to Bentley. He looked at leaves, blades of grass, insects, and when winter came, snowflakes. That started a fascination that led to a lifetime of work, and the lifelong nickname, Snowflake.
Once he saw just the delicate beauty, it captured his attention. It just captivated him. He spent 2 years trying to draw the snowflakes, the designs that he saw, holding his breath so they wouldn't melt, and then got this idea somewhere from a magazine or something. He saw an article about this camera with a microscope attached and thought, if I had that, I could photograph the snowflakes, not just try to draw them, and preserve the beauty for all time. So after much discussion and persuasion, he convinced his parents, primarily his mother, to purchase this camera for him for his 17th birthday. And that was the beginning.
Bentley spent the next 2 years figuring out how to capture the image of a snow crystal through the microscope. The process involved a number of challenges that called for creative solutions, including rigging up a pulley system when he couldn't reach the front of the camera to focus.
He had to work in the cold because otherwise the snow crystals would melt so quickly. He worked in an unheated woodshed. He wore heavy mittens so that his warmth from his hands wouldn't warm the microscope slide and cause the snowflake to melt too quickly, and basically had to hold his breath when he was transferring the snowflake from the wooden tray to the microscope slide so that the vapor wouldn't melt the snowflake too quickly. And then it was a question of figuring out how to focus and how to process this correctly. So it was a truly learning curve. He was a true pioneer in photomicrography.
Along with the intricate process he came up with for photographing the crystals, Bentley also kept very detailed records of the weather and conditions during each storm.
He was able to start figuring out science-wise what might be happening to snow crystals.
Mark Breen is a meteorologist at the Fairbanks Museum in St. Johnsbury. A number of the tools and language Bentley developed to describe what he saw are still used in the scientific community today. And many of his theories about why different storms produce different shaped flakes have been proven true.
And this is before we really thought about storms the way that we see them today. And so he's really looking at not what was happening in Chicago or Detroit or something like that. He was focused on what was happening in Nashville in his backyard. But he kept very careful records of the temperatures, like I said, wind direction. And over time, he started tying that with the types of crystals. So I can remember one of the notes that I saw where he had a collection of snow crystals and he called them local crystals. And he felt that they were produced in a cloud that was basically happening over that western range of the Green Mountains. And indeed, that turns out to be the case.
While photographing snowflakes was a passion for Bentley, he never made a living at it. He owned a farm in Jericho with his brother and fit his photography around his farm chores, taking thousands of images and also making copies of his slides for schools and institutions.
He never made any money. In fact, he spent more money than he ever made. He sold copies of his slides to schools, universities, to Tiffany's jewelers for jewelry design, and he charged 5 cents a plate, which covered his costs. He was still charging 5 cents a plate in 1931 when he passed. He never raised his price. We figured it out one time, he probably made about $7,500 over all those years, and he spent about $15,000. So it definitely wasn't a career, it was a passion.
Bentley photographed a wide variety of subjects in the natural world and chronicled his family, but his lifelong dedication to capturing snowflakes never faded. In the end, it's even what did him in.
He was coming back from Burlington, came up to Richmond on the train, and it had been a winter very much devoid of snow, warmer than normal. He hadn't photographed a single snowflake because there just hadn't been any snow. So this day, as he was coming back, it started to snow. His friends wanted him to stay in Richmond and not walk back to Nashville because of the storm, but he insisted on getting home because it was snowing. And he was ready to take some photographs because, as I said, he hadn't taken any that year. He caught a chill, a cold. It turned into pneumonia, and he passed away on the 23rd of December, 1931.
Today, visitors from all over come to the Jericho Historical Society to see their Snowflake Bentley exhibit. And copies of his prints are on display in museums from Shelburne to the Smithsonian.
He photographed snowflakes in Canada and upstate New York in different areas. They were never as good or as intricate as the ones he photographed right there at home in Jericho.
He left a legacy that reaches from the small town of Jericho, Vermont, around the globe. Snowflake Bentley showed the world how to take a closer look at the little things. In Jericho, I'm Rebecca Golan with Across the Fence.
For more information on the work and the legacy of Snowflake Bentley, we encourage you to visit the Jericho Historical Society. That's our program for today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.